and welcome to this episode of Artsibly in Conversation. My name is Diane Collin. I am a woman with short hair, blue eyes, and glasses, and today I wear a black top. Behind me are an electronic piano and white shelves with books. This series presents artists, academics, and project leaders who dedicate their time and energy to a better accessibility for people with disabilities in the arts. You can find more of these conversations on our website, artsably.com, which is spelled artsably.com. Today, Artsably is in conversation with Malicious Sheep, who is a multidisciplinary artist, a photographer, a vocalist, and a community scientist. You can find the resources mentioned by Malicious Sheep during this episode on Artsably's website in the blog section. Welcome, everybody. Today I am with an artist called Malicious Sheep, and they are a lot of different things, lots of different identity, but a multidisciplinary artist, and I will let them introduce themselves. Welcome, Malicious Sheep.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Malicious Sheep. I am a non binary, queer, and multiply disabled, multidisciplinary artist, photographer, and vocalist, as well as a poet from rural Canada. I'm a disability justice advocate, policy writer, community organizer for multiple communities, and a kind artist. That is short for chronically ill, immunocompromised, neurodivergent, and disabled. And I experience all of those identities. I am a chronic volunteer and I provide peer support and artist support. And I do all of this virtually as I am immunocompromised and quarantine is still very much on for me and probably will be in perpetuity. Um, I have no visual description to share with you, as is custom. Um, as I exist as a somewhat tangible identity within my artist community solely through my voice, my disembodied voice. But my identifying profile picture, I can describe for you. It is a macro photograph of a small jumping spider nestled in the flowering and seed bearing portion of a red root pigweed in autumn with tones of pinks and greens. And this photograph was captured by yours truly. This little spider friend followed me around my garden the first year I seriously started to explore photography as a medium. And this photograph was the moment that I knew it would become one of my favorite mediums because of its accessibility.
Oh, very good. Thank you. There on your website, there are many great things that you are presenting. And the first thing that I really saw was your photography, because
Mm,
your photographic work explores uh, small details about nature, about plants, still lives, something like that. And
mhm.
it's really being in the eye of the nature. And I was wondering if you could present um, this part of your work, but also some other parts of your works that are related, such as painting and everything else you're doing.
Sure, of course. Yeah, so with my photographic process, um, I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. Then the context will be a bit more clear, I think. So I went to school for post-secondary education for about a year before a lot of my health concerns started to accelerate to the point where I experienced sudden and rapid wasting. Still undetermined as the cause of that, almost 15 years on. Um, but it left me unable to care for myself, unable to do what I had traditionally done, which was hyper realistic, detailed paintings, um, as well as mixed media, sculpture, lots of physical work. Um, and that period of wasting and being unable to care for myself lasted almost 10 years. In order to get myself re-engaged creatively, I I took it upon myself. I got a camera. I'm so glad I did. Um, and in my space in the yard of the property, I made a goal for every day I would go outside for as long as I could tolerate, be that 15 minutes or 4 hours, whatever it happened to be that day. I would photograph as much as I could. As soon as I got tired, I would sit down for 15 minutes. I would rest, and then I would make my way back inside and then study everything that I had photographed. Because a lot of my movement was very slow, um, very deliberate, because I was being very aware of my own body. I was being very aware of where I could and could not step. Nature kind of didn't mind me so much. So I would always get all the little bugs, like usually a bug will fly away if you get too close, or a squirrel will take off if you're too close. But I was definitely not a threat. And so I think that that gave me an opportunity to photograph a little bit more. And also because my world had become so small, because I wasn't able to explore outward like I used to. Like I used to live in Toronto. I used to run around all over the place and um, explore the city. At this point, I was definitely not able to do that. I was barely able to access uh, the space around me. So when I did explore, I wanted to take a look at the little moments that were often left unnoticed, little scenes. I really enjoyed capturing textures and repeating patterns. That's part I believe in myself for the musical quality that I also have. I really love that patterning, how it's appearing in nature. I love biomimetics as well, things that look like or could be used um, in real life that occur in nature as well. Um, a lot of my photographs have been explorations of my symptoms as I'm experiencing them as well. So if I'm a synesthete, so many types of synesthesia as well. Um, Textures and pain are associated in my brain, and so I wanted to capture color palettes or textures that were associated with the pain sensations that I was experiencing, because I do have 6 different pain disorders. Um, so there's a lot of variety there. um, but yeah, a lot of my favorite things were uh, finding little scenes, little mating dances of spiders, or um, a bird feather that had fallen just so perfectly and was captured in some sort of vines, or like little things that if you weren't paying attention to them, you would never see that they were there. And we have such busy lives, like especially like having remembered what it was like in the city, like there's just so much going on. There's so much going on in our heads. I wanted to just be very present with the space, um, and understand it fundamentally as my neighbor and my home and my friends. I wanted to really get a sense of where I was sharing my space and um, how the different individuals within that shared space were interacting with one another. And over time, I have now developed, as I've started to get stronger and be more able to spend more time outside. I've developed a permaculture organic garden with many
Mm.
layers to provide homes for all of the different critters and things in a way that um, has grown over the last few years.
I wonder with the synesthesia, I know you're also a vocalist, so
Mm-hmm.
sound is important for you. And
Mm-hmm.
does this affect when you're taking pictures? Are you thinking inside your creative process? Are you thinking about the sound?
Yes, very much so. So I'll usually, pretty much all day, every day, I have one earbud in one ear. I switch them back and forth so that I'm balancing. But I have one earbud in my ear, and it will have music in it. And the other one, I'll be able to listen to the ambient sounds. And I love doing this in nature because I compare the music with my pain and I compare my visualization with my pain and explore that through the photography, but also um, through the storytelling and the lyricism. Sometimes I'll pick something in particular that will pair well with that, and then I will also um, sometimes use my own voice as the secondary. So if I'm feeling like I need to vocalize, I need to process something through vocals, I will do that as I'm moving through the space. So sometimes I actually end up calling a bunch of birds over, which is really nice, like some sort of cartoon character or something. I've made many a friend with the birds. The chickadees are my favorite. They like to sit on my shoulder and follow me around the garden.
Nice.
Um, yeah.
And you're also a community scientist, so I think that that also contributed. The exploration of
Mhm.
your garden led you to that,
Yes.
or yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I when my body uh, was in a state that could move around space more easily when I was much younger, I would spend hours hiking, going through conservation authority areas and parks, identifying things there. And so my photography at that point was more documentarian to identify things and to be able to send little reports to the conservation authorities about invasive species or about potential endangered species that I had seen. Um, and so having that framework and enjoyment of science and then blending that with art, like both of those two um, focuses have always been there for me. As long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be an artist because it's a way that I can communicate that I feel like I can't do verbally. Um, but also the trying to understand things through science has always really fascinated me as well. Um, I really excelled at both of those in school, and I had actually applied to two different types of universities for both of those and then had to pick.
Mm.
um, so I chose art, but in the end, I was only able to go for about a year. So I had top grades. But yeah, it was being able to. I'm also an autodidact, so I'm able to really teach myself anything, which is helpful. Um, and having that space outside of the regular framework of education, like in a self directed, flexible, and accessible way, I feel like I was able to explore what I needed to explore in each realm to be able to blend them together in a way that has really benefited me through being able to communicate outwardly about things that I'm experiencing or, um, disability justice or things like that. And then has lent into my community organizing, which has been lovely.
You also have access needs. So
Hmm.
how do you fit these access needs in your creative practices?
Yes. So I have many a condition, um, many a fluctuation in symptom expression. I have like an alphabet soup of conditions. So it is a lot to manage. Um, So many of my access needs are dependent on what symptom expression is occurring at that time. So with my painting, what I used to do was very high detailed uh, paintings. Um, and I was unable to do that at a certain point because I started to develop tremors. And I became very frustrated with the output that I was creating, because it was not what I knew that I could do aside from the tremors. And so it was very disheartening and like a difficult grieving process that I had to go through for that. Um, I switched to the photography because it was a more accessible option to me. But what I end up doing, I have done for a very long time, is um, I can, because of my tremors, I have to compensate for them while I'm taking the photograph. So, in almost like a reverse syncopation, I'm following the pendulum swing of where the tremor is and capturing it right in the middle when there's clarity, which is difficult just in any photography, but like macro photography especially because there's just so many details that could go um, unseen and uncaptured. So I I um, I do that compensation. I anchor my arm into my body, or I'm um, resting against something physically to anchor that so that the tremor isn't as significant. Um, and now it has um, it has become almost second nature for me. I'm kind of flowing and swaying as I'm taking pictures. I look a little bit strange, but um, I'm compensating for like the wind and my body and trying to capture that very still moment. Um, but I did recently, one of my friends, a fellow photographer, asked me about my process because he knew about my hand tremors and he wanted to understand a little bit about why that wasn't in my work. Like he couldn't see that in my work. And so then I took a little bit of a a self-reflecting dive on that of why I was trying to hide that, um, a little bit of internalized ableism to unpack. um, and so immediately I went out, and it was the middle of the night in the middle of winter. I took photographs of the moon, but I let my hand tremors fly free. And I ended up capturing these really beautiful, they looked almost generative, almost like paint strokes, photographs of the moon, where you can see all of those tremors in full view. And it was very freeing. And I really want to incorporate that more into my work. But yeah, for other access needs, I feel like for me, like I cannot leave home. I am ordered home by my doctor forever. Like I cannot leave. So the only way that I can access art community is to do so virtually. Um, and so I really try to, um, as a community organizer, connect people who I know are interested in creating virtual spaces, and accessible spaces to help them um, connect and then be able to facilitate their creation of those spaces, um, as well as connecting disabled artists
Mhm.
with those developers and those other community organizers and things. So um, yeah, most of what my experience with the art world prior to the pandemic was simply not accessible to me, um, either physically or in some cases socially as well. Um, I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. I use a cane. I have um, um, mm, it's like as I move my body, as I move different muscle groupings, regardless of where they occur in my body, the weaker they will get. Um, so a lot of even just a car ride to a gallery first and foremost would take a lot out of me, and then my cognition would be down,
Mhm.
so I wouldn't be able to as actively participate. But then most of the gallery spaces that I was interacting with also had no ramp, or were up or down a full flight of stairs, um, in a historical building, so it was very tight and like no handrails. So like a lot of the spaces that I was trying to access, I physically couldn't. It was dangerous for me too. Um, and then learning about my immunodeficiency, that made it even more difficult even prior to the pandemic, because it is not something that people tend to see,
Mhm.
um, because it's not a it wasn't as um, known as an issue until the pandemic.
Mhm.
Um, but then after the pandemic, my world opened up in a way that it never had. Um, Everybody switched to virtual because it was the accessible option for everybody at that time, right? So a lot of um, a lot of spaces that I really wanted to participate in, I finally could, and I thrived in them. So disability justice, political organizing, um, things that I never would have had access to otherwise, finally opened up for me, and I decided to keep pushing for that for other people.
The positive side about this pandemic is that it gave an opportunity to an opening to dialogue with people who were used to always being outside at the
Hmm.
office. And as disabled people, we found a way to create accessibility with the digital tools that we had, and that stayed after the pandemic. So that is, I'm really thankful for that, to be able to connect with many people all around Canada and the world, from an office, and create a notion of accessible dialogue. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact that this is a tool. So when we are talking about adaptations and access needs, there are a lot of access needs that we were able to add with these digital connections. And now, as you said, some galleries are not accessible for wheelchairs or mobility aids users. I am a mobility aid user, I'm a wheelchair user, and
Hmm.
I am confronted to that all the time. But now uh, we have streaming. We have
Yes,
possibility
exactly.
of doing um, uh, meetings with artists, or online exhibitions, or just a visit of a physical exhibition that would then be an online visit for people who cannot come physically.
Hmm. Yeah, the hybrid access, I think, is the key. Um,
Mhm.
it is something that in my community organizing I really try to push for as well, especially because the community that I do organize for is a global one. Um, so generally, if there's like an event like Art Basel, um, most people, unless they live in the States or have a high income, um, or don't have other responsibilities that they can't accommodate for, they just aren't able to go. Whereas with the hybrid option, where there is a bit of both, um, it makes it so that those folks who maybe in Australia who can't make it to the US, or someone like me who is multiply disabled and cannot leave home, can still participate. And I think it's just the most beautiful thing. I really, I really do.
I was also wondering if you have developed other in the research of accommodating your access needs. Do you
Mhm.
have um, did you use special tools or did you try to use, I don't know, a stabilizer for your camera, for example, or something to help you um, uh, being more in your garden or a longer time, for example?
Mhm. Yeah, actually, not the stabilizer, but the the garden itself, I slowly established layers to the garden, as well as seating
Mhm.
sprinkled throughout so that there would be somewhere for me to sit, as well as smooth paths. So, depending on my symptom expression of the day, I could either use my chair or my cane or walk freely, but still need rest periods where I would, take 15 minutes to rest and then decide whether or not that was enough for the day or if I could continue. But there was I believe it's about every 15 feet or so, there is somewhere to sit
Mhm.
in those gardens, be it a stump or a rock or something. There's something to sit on. Um, and so that's really helped, as well as providing things like shade for myself through specific types of planting and organizing of how the gardens lay, um, like where the sun exposure is going to be, because I'm also very sensitive to that. So there's a lot of a lot of different considerations, and I've applied them all, and I feel like it is it is a beautiful, accessible space for me where I can play and create. Without having to spend a lot of my cognitive energy on self protection. um, I can be a little bit more relaxed and really dive into my work.
It seems like a great place to rest and see the seasons change in nature.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So, do you have, speaking of exhibitions, do you expose your work?
So I've had a couple of opportunities through this digital community that I'm part of, digital art community. I've had a few opportunities to exhibit my work. Um, One was at NFT NYC in 2023, which was great, as well as with a project from the Selfie Institute called Throwing Digital Bricks, which is a queer art, queer digital art exploration, where I submitted a piece for consideration, which was accepted, called Aubergine in Repose. Um, Most of my photographs, a little side tangent again, this is how my brain works.
Mhm.
Most of my photographs are unedited and unstaged, photographed in situ without any artificial lighting. I would rather wait for the lighting to be correct than to light it falsely. And I would rather capture the raw moment than change it, um, because as a multi-identity um, disabled person, like erasure is a really big component of our experience. So I don't want to edit my work or alter it. I want it to be as raw as possible, especially in a world now that everything is edited. Um, there's so much. There's very little uh, raw in what we are absorbing visually
Mhm.
nowadays through art. And so for me, it's really important to have that. Um, I feel like a lot of when I am creating it in that way, it helps to affirm myself that I don't need to change, that I don't need to be changed, and to honor my own history. Um, but then back to the piece, Aubergine and Repose. That is one of the very few, and there's only two photographs that I've published um, that have been staged and artificially lit. They're both still unedited, but it is a aubergine as well as some tomatoes, some oranges, and pomegranates. The aubergine itself is placed on a velvety green tasseled cushion. It is meant to emulate, visually, it's meant to emulate the style of a Renaissance oil painting in tone and quality and content and forms, and to express a lot about not only um, conversations about disability and that rest is not valued, firstly, within our society, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Should be. Um, but also, generally, when there is a painting in that style, generally it is of a white woman, nude, created for the male gaze. And so I wanted to create something that uses the avoidant language that we often associate with out groups, such as queer communities or disabled communities, um, and as well as with sex. Um, the emoji, uh, the aubergine emoji, is uh, phallic and is um, in an attempt to avoid uh, outright stating certain things, right? So I wanted to utilize that imagery to create a new form, um, a focus, and to shift the. Um, I wanted to shift the gaze from the male gaze to something that was a little bit more open for the female gaze as well as the trans and non-binary gaze, um, because I feel like that's very important. You
Mhm.
kind of shift the perspective. Um, and I've had a couple other pieces that have been shown as well. There was one I took of a sawfly larva eating a blade of grass, and it's called Devour. And uh, that piece was also shown in New York um, as part of an exhibition in 2023 during NFT NYC, um, which was great because that's one of my favorites, just from all of the detail I was actually able to capture in the textures of that tiny little critter on a tiny blade of grass. Very proud moment.
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of uh, a lot of that.
I like the
Yeah.
fact that you're having a lot of intersectionality in your work.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it comes comes with the package. I have to think about and process this for myself, so I might as well communicate that through art. And I find, for me anyway, the it is more interesting in the intersection, in the collision, where things are um, blending together or having, I don't want to say conflict, but like bumping up against each other in a way that creates something new. It's like a liminal space. I really love exploring that. How things can relate to one another, how things can be more than one thing at the same time. I really love um, creating that and then utilizing those types of visuals to tell a story about that experience. Hmm.
You already mentioned it a little bit, but I want to come back to the notion of accessibility in the arts. What is it
Hmm.
for you as an artist to be working on that topic of accessibility in the arts in the intersection with other fields?
Hmm. Yeah, so generally, when I'm talking about disability justice or accessibility, I like to lead with um, the antonym to disability is not ability, nor disable to able. Rather, it is to disable or to enable. And taking that mindset with you as you try and solve for the access needs of others, I think really changes how people approach it. Because disability is not inherent to the individual, right? Like we know this, but rather we are disabled by society systematically and socially. And so there's a difference between hindering or helping or sidelining or supporting. So for me, accessibility in the arts means enabling creatives to participate in whatever capacity I'm able to. Um, and whether that be in person or virtually, regardless of their access needs, regardless of equity status or socioeconomic factors, the community collectively meeting them where they are and taking active and ongoing steps to remove barriers, both physical and social, as well as to use creative thinking, which as creatives we have an abundance of,
Mhm.
to problem solve, to meet the access needs of each community member as those needs are presented. Um, yeah, I've I really think that there are ways to do that that really don't take a lot. Um, and I feel like a lot of the hesitance from people that I've seen over the years is related to a fear that they're going to do it wrong, that they're going to cause more harm if they are willing, but they still won't, work towards that. There is that fear of being part of the problem. Um, but as I always say, like bring disabled folks into the fold.
Mhm.
We have ideas. We've been
Yes, we do.
managing this for ourselves for a very long time. We know, the limits, we know the possibilities, and especially with all sorts of new technologies, like combining people together who are often siloed apart, who don't often interact, like engineers and artists, or, you know, like in my realm, developers and artists and disabled folk all coming together in a beautiful trifecta and solving a problem together. There is like, I find there is a cultural and linguistic barrier for that to happen. But once it's started and you've got somebody who kind of fits within all of those realms, like me, um, it's helpful because you can help translate for everybody until that becomes a more of a shared language. Um, like my experience with all of the developers that I know, a lot of them didn't, unless you specifically go for disability accessibility and technology, you're not taught about any of it,
Mhm.
right? It's the same with everything. You're just not taught about it, even though it affects everything.
Mhm.
So I feel like combining combining people is my favorite thing.
Yeah.
Bringing them together so we can make magic. Um, but yeah, I feel like for me, a lot of what's driven me to do this too, because like there's obviously the physical inaccessibility of being able to participate in spaces. But also like applications for grant programs or residencies for me over 10 years. I've never received a single letter of acceptance,
Mhm.
but not because of my work, which in the letters they express, it's not a form letter, they express like this is really great. We just do not have capacity or ability to meet your needs, and we're very sorry. And that's even in spaces that were self-described as being accessible residencies, they just did not have the capacity for that for me in my particular case. And so that feeling of being left out has really driven me to make space so that others aren't feeling that way, because like knowing through my disability justice work, I'm certainly not alone. I'm not the
Mhm.
only one with this experience. There's 1 in 5 at best are disabled and are in some way kept from their dreams. And there's this horrible feedback loop of not seeing disabled out in public, and because it's not accessible, then they're not working on making it accessible, and therefore disabled people can't attend, and then therefore they don't see them.
Mhm.
So there, yeah, the variability in access needs is too much for most to handle if they haven't even experienced someone in their life with disability, and treating those with access needs as a collaborator instead of an inconvenience or something to, um, you know, like a target to reach or something like that. It could really shift the dynamic, I think. Um, but unfortunately, there's still a really unhealthy conflation between disability and moral failing and like social contagion and as a perceived deserved punishment for difference. That has a lot to do with like people, systemically, we don't process grief, we don't process trauma, particularly intergenerational trauma.
Mhm.
There's a lack of visibility in media and in life.
Mhm.
Um, and but I do see it shifting.
Yeah.
But unfortunately at the expense of many, many beautiful lives that have value outside of production. And yeah,
I
but
have the feeling that there is also the fact that people don't know
yeah,
because
exactly.
there is no exposure, as you just said.
Hmm.
So when every time I'm talking about accessibility with someone in the artistic community who is no who didn't encounter someone with a disability before and who didn't have um, even the occasion to in the past to think about accessibility in their own spaces or
Hmm.
just didn't think of the details, such as, okay, great, I have a ramp and so people can access. No, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not because you have a ramp that you're
It's
accessible.
not a checkbox situation.
But it comes with
Mm,
conversations. And
exactly.
once you start conversing today specifically, because we start having these conversations in public spaces and in communications with politicians, with universities, with schools, and
Hmm.
saying we have people out there who need to be seen. And if you don't make this little step of pushing the uh, open-minded uh, spirit of making things better, it's not only about disabled folks, right? It's also about universal design. If you make it
Hmm.
accessible for someone in a stroller, you make it accessible to everybody.
Hmm.
So someone thinking about that and saying, "Oh yeah, I didn't think about that specific aspect of society."
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot.
Mhm.
I feel like um yeah, I feel like one of the main barriers is like people just simply haven't seen disabled people because the disabled people were kept away from people for a very long time. like there's no intergenerational stories about disabled people other than that were taken away usually. So there's a lot of that to unpack and to heal as a society. Um, but then also with like in a more modern context too, like most accessible things designed for disabled people, because nobody wants to fund it, ends up being promoted as like a tool or a toy or a game, um, and isn't really implemented as as an accessibility thing where everybody has accessibility needs, everyone,
Mhm, mhm,
regardless of whether or not you're disabled. um, I feel like for example, um, closed captions
mhm,
uh, could have been available on YouTube for a long, long time. Um, it took them 10 years to implement them,
mhm.
even though they had them, right? And similarly with touch screens, which we use every single day, were designed for disabled people to be
Mhm.
able to communicate and to access the world. Text to speech,
Yep.
um, screen readers,
Audiobooks.
all of these
Yep.
things. Yeah, exactly. There's so many things that had had the focus not been on profitability but on access, and therefore um, engagement. I think a lot of things would be very different.
Yes. And
Hmm.
also, it's very expensive. Most of these things that are
Hmm.
developed for a specific purpose and not being integrated in society, which would make it more affordable.
Hmm. Yeah, precisely. Yeah, and disabled folks generally live way under the poverty line. So
Mhm.
like being able to access those tools that were designed for them is just out of reach often, which
Yeah.
yeah, but
We
yeah,
still
I
have
think
some road to do.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's where I spend a lot of my time. Um, Trying to solve for some of the virtual versions of this, because there are like physical spaces that are inaccessible because say they don't have a ramp or what have you, but virtually there's also similar barriers that exist, which unless you are someone who has experienced that and been unable to access something because of that and then communicated that to someone who knows somebody, you can't really solve for them. So I really try to do that. I After that decade of being so closed off and then having that world open for me with virtual spaces, I can see it closing off again. Um, there are less things that are taking place online, more things are taking place in person. But I refuse to be passive about it. Instead, I want to make something that is more lasting, that will continue to flourish um, collaboratively with folks in my community, so that we still have a virtual space to work with.
Speaking of collaboration, I have a last question,
Hmm.
which is about inspiration or people in or community in the artistic community sharing visible spaces, who might have inspired you or whom would you like to collaborate with? Who would that person be?
So I'm very torn. I have I have two people in mind and then a community. So the two people I will briefly talk about. The first is Mari Migraine. She is a digital painter, a migraine and mental illness advocate from Italy. She crafts contrast between vibrancy and darkness through self portraiture. She explores visual hallucinations and impressions of her physical pain through really exquisite pieces, often also playing into digital cultural references. But her symptoms significantly impact her work, so it takes a lot of time for her to create. but she does continue to persevere and tell her story and make connections. And she has developed a slow glitch style to provide an accessible option to photosensitive fans of digital animations within the glitch art subgenre. Um, and I'm very proud of her for that. The second person is LM Designs 8. She is a multidisciplinary artist from the US who explores her experience with chronic illness and disability through poetry and music as the host of a weekly space, as well as through immersive, playable virtual experiences in the form of interactive virtual worlds that she has built. um, and she creates these to host live events, to explore connections between art, music, and poetry with a global community. She always is fostering beautiful collaborations with between people, which has been amazing. Um, and then the the third one, which is the community that I organized for, I gotta give them a shout out. It is called Taya Community. Taya is a DAO LLC nonprofit organization. It is laterally structured, community owned and maintained from open source um, uh, code, and it reaches every corner of the world. We are constantly building and adding new tools, new accessibility options. One of the really wonderful ones that we were able to set up um, is photosensitivity and not safe for work filters. So when you are creating your art to be posted on that site, um, it allows for the option to indicate if it is going to be a flashing or undulating or highly patterned piece that may affect folks with migraine or epilepsy or vertigo, as well as the not safe for work filters for any sexual or potentially violent imagery that um, may affect folks who have conditions such as complex PTSD, um, and or who have experienced traumatic events like war or other difficult subject matter that care needs to be taken in how that is presented. So when people access that site without logging in, they those pieces will be blurred and still, so that it is a safe first experience. And then within the user settings, each user can choose whether or not to see one or both of those components based on their own needs. And um, it has been working very well. And it's been really great to see all of the artists in the community as we started to present this as an option. Um, a lot of the artists were surprised that this was a problem, like that their work could cause others harm, and were very grateful that that had been solved for them because
Mhm.
they were unaware of it, but the problem had been solved for them. And so they're very active in tagging their work appropriately with those qualifiers to make sure that they are safe.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that community is all volunteer run, so we uh, we have a good time of it.
That sounds great.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today. And I wish you a very good time in your garden. And I look forward to other great pictures of nature.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this opportunity today and this beautiful conversation because I really enjoyed myself and meeting you. So thank you.
Thank you.